Hello, hello, 皆さん、こんにちは. My name is Yoshi Domoto. I'm the executive director of the Japan America Society of Georgia, and I'm so thrilled that you are all joining us today for a very special talk with Shu Matsuo Post as we discuss vulnerability, authenticity, and feminism in Japan and beyond. As we begin today, we'd like to introduce our two moderators. We have from our board of directors, Ms. Jessica Cork, the Vice Chair of the Japan American Society of Georgia, and Ms. Nozomi Morgan, who is the Programs Committee Co-Chair. But at this time, we'd like to hand off the mic to Ms. Nozomi-san, and Nozomi-san will introduce our program and talk about her story a little bit.
Hi, yoroshiku onegaishimasu. Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to have you here tonight because we have such a special guest, and I can't emphasize enough how special this is to have Shu Matsuo Post-san from joining in from Tokyo. And I just wanted to share with you my experience. When I first saw his book, I took her name. The first thing that came to my mind was my own experience of taking my mother's last name. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But for those who might not know about, in Japan, everything goes by family. So family is really important in your individual. So if you're, I should say, there's a public record called the family registry called koseki. And so each family, there's a head of the family, and usually that's your father if you have both parents. And it's kind of like a social security, but instead of having individuals, we have it by family. So my parents got divorced when I was 16, which is very uncommon at that time, which meant that my family got divided, so I would follow into my mother's. So I took my mother's name from my father's name to my mother's name. And at that age, if you can imagine, changing your last name in Japan was very unusual. And I felt very shamed, embarrassed. So actually at school, I never talked about it. And I went by my father's last name. But officially, all the official records were changed to my mother's maiden name. So at the graduation, where the teacher reads your official name, which is on the certificate. So in Japan, we have no choice. They never ask you what name you want to put on, because usually official records is exactly what you have on everything. So the principal read out my name with my mother's maiden name, which was such a devastating time for me because no one at school knew that my name has changed. So with that experience, going through that, so I had my own experience going through that, and as I got more comfortable through college, getting comfortable with using my mother's name, I started to realize, for me, when it comes to, we're talking about vulnerability, authenticity, and feminism in Japan, for me, that was my vulnerable moment. But also talking about authenticity, I really realized the name meant less for me, and realizing that myself, as long as I knew who I was, the name would not define me. So that was my own experience. And that really, when I saw your book, Shu Matsuo Post-san, it really kind of triggered that memory again in a good way. And just kind of made me think, as reading your book too, each of us has a different journey and experiences, even with just names. So super excited to hear more. So now, Jessica-san, it's your turn.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm so excited that this event is finally here. I actually had the opportunity first to learn of Shu Matsuo Post-san's work back in November. I heard him speak on a webinar, and then I saw him speak on a podcast, and that was because his book was just about to come out. And so the first thing I did after I heard the webinar is I ran out and I bought the book and read the book, and I was really determined that we were going to invite him to speak to us. here in Atlanta. And so this is really one of the benefits, I guess, of this crazy time that we're living in with COVID, that we're able to have a speaker from Tokyo and we're able to have this conversation on the other side of the world and be able to talk together like this. So part of the reason why, I was so excited to hear from Shu-san is that, it's really great for me, I think, as a woman, to hear a man talking about these issues, especially on gender equality, and especially a Japanese man. Honestly, Shu-san, you're the first Japanese man, I think, that I've heard really bring up this topic. I'm sure there are plenty others out there who think the way you do, but it was a really refreshing message for me to hear. And I've had the opportunity to participate in so many women's events over the years. And those are really great. Like, I've made really great friendships through them. I've realized that there's a lot of other women out there who are struggling with the same issues. And those events are really good to be able to validate a lot of the feelings that I had. But at the same time, I also strongly feel that if we limit these kinds of conversations just to women, we might fall into this kind of preaching to the choir mentality. The women get together, we all sort of complain about what the problems are, and then it kind of stays within just that group of women. And I think at a lot of these events that I've attended, it's that the women all know what needs to change. And I think it's not the women that needs to change. There's a lot of things in our society, both Japanese society and American society, that need to change. So, really the idea that I think that we want to hear more from your perspective is this idea of both women and men together working to change society, and that both men and women should be able to pursue whatever goals that they have and dreams that they have, regardless of what their gender role is or traditional gender role. And I do have to give a shout out to my husband, who I hope is participating tonight, because I think this is a really great example. We have 4 kids. But I love my job and I love working and I love being a mom, but the only way that I could possibly perform at the level that I want to perform at work is to have a husband who's extremely supportive of me. And he's actually been the full-time dad, taking care of these 4 kids, getting on all their Zoom calls and things that they're doing all day long during COVID. And there's absolutely no way I would have been able to do that without my husband. And he's also taking on that role as a man. That's really not the traditional way of doing things. So I really think that's what true freedom is all about. And I really can't wait to hear your perspectives on that. So with that, I would like to introduce you quickly, and then we're going to jump right in to listen to your story. But so Shumatsu Post, we understand, very successful business person in Japan, but that Japan is still sadly one of the most gender rigid countries in the world, right? And you are the author of a brand new book that's just out, I Took Her Name, and I know that we will have in the chat box, or sorry, the link will be there for anyone who's interested in reading that. That was published last fall. And in addition to being a feminism advocate, you're also a zero waste advocate and a plant-based endurance athlete. So I'm actually kind of interested to hear about that part as well. And you do real estate investing. So kind of a lot of different interests there. And you live in Tokyo with your wife, and you have a new son as well. And I know that you're also on your paternity leave, which is just wonderful that you're taking that opportunity to spend the time with your baby as well. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Wow, thank you, Jessica-san, Nozomi-san, and your son for such a warm welcome. Hello, everyone. Konbanwa. It's good morning from Tokyo. It's such an honor to be here with you today. And we have been planning this event for the last few months. So I've been really excited about this event and to speak with all of you today. If I may, I want to take a moment to share my thoughts about the recent hate crime against Asian American community in Atlanta. Like many of you, I've been deeply saddened to hear the news about this terrible incident of hate and violence aimed at the Asian community. While I grew up in Japan and spent a majority of my time my life here in Japan, I did spend 8.5 years in the US and experienced bigotry when I was younger. But the hate the Asian American community across the country is experiencing now seems much more pronounced, with a lot of physical, actual violence and lives being taken. And it's becoming increasingly clear that the root cause of these hate crimes are driven by racist and sexist beliefs, and this must stop. While today's webinar focuses on gender equality rather than race, I believe in equality for all people. And I know that Japan America Society of Georgia is built on community, and the strength of it is rooted in diversity, inclusiveness, and compassion. And organizations like JASG are what keeps me hopeful that we can create a better tomorrow together. So I'm sending love and light your way from Tokyo. So some of you might be wondering why a man is giving a talk about feminism and gender equality. So let me introduce myself and share a little bit about myself. So my name is Shu. Matsuo Post is my last name. I'm a Japanese national who has spent time in Japan, the US, and Hong Kong. And I'm a husband, a new father of a 6-month-old boy who just turned 6 months this week. And I'm a feminism advocate. And I'm here today to share a Japanese male perspective on feminism. Here's the thing. I got those great introductions. But the thing is, I don't have a PhD in masculinity or even a degree in gender studies. But I do have, I did get an MBA, and I do have a pretty unique story. So I took my wife's last name. My partner is American, and we got married in the US. During our engagement, we decided to combine our last names to Matsuo Post when we got married. Because we wanted to keep our identity while having a sense of unity so that our future children could have the same last name as us. So that's what we chose to do. And the day after we got married, we changed our last name at a city hall in San Diego, California, where we had our wedding. And the process was very simple and easy. It probably took less than 15 minutes or so. To officially change our name to Matsuo Post. So my birth name was just Matsuo, and my partner's name was just Post, and we combined them to Matsuo Post. And we went on the honeymoon, and we after we got married, and we were actually moving to Japan from Hong Kong at the time, coincidentally. So I was coming back home to my home country, so I decided to change my name in Japan as well. So I went to the city hall, trying to do the same thing I did in the US, but the things looked very different. So like Nozomi-san mentioned, last names play a big role in Japan. We have this thing called koseki, which is a family registry. And I didn't know to be honest, because I had been away from Japan for so long. I didn't know too much about the strict rules of what it means to be in someone's koseki. And also what I didn't know at the time was that Japan doesn't allow married couples to combine their last names or even have separate last names as married couples. So because of this, 96% of wives end up taking their husband's last names in Japan. And at the city hall, I was told I couldn't combine our last names without the permission from the family court. So I visited a family court a few weeks after our marriage, thinking that, isn't family court, a place where couples that are about to get divorced go? So I was like a little bit nervous. But at the family court, I pleaded my case to the judge, stating that I had already changed my name in the US. So I wanted to do the same thing in Japan. And then the judge told me, since I was marrying a foreign national, I could have my spouse change her name first in her home country, which she did, and take her name after that. So that's what I did. And that's why my book is called I Took Her Name. even though we technically combined our last names. So it was a very long and complicated process as a Japanese male married to a foreign national to change his name. And that's when it really hit me. Why does Japan and so many other cultures around the world expect women to take their husband's name? It was something I didn't have to think about. I didn't know how much this world was tilted in men's favor until that moment. So I decided to ask myself, what other gender biases do we see in our everyday life? And that's when I decided to write a book on my experience, because I saw a lot that I didn't know. And, you know, let me ask you, when you hear the word feminism, what comes to your mind? Well, feminism is not a women's issue. For me, it's a humanity issue. If half the population is not actively involved, we'll never achieve gender equality. So what can men do? We need to smash the patriarchy that divides men and women by confronting traditional gender norms. And in my opinion, patriarchy is the root cause of rigid gender norms. So in order to dismantle patriarchy, we need to confront gender expectations in our society. You know, I used to think I was supposed to be a certain way only because I identified myself as a male. You know, things like be tough, never cry, win at all costs, be aggressive, be dominant, and don't show your emotions. And once I let go of that, I started to connect with my true self, the authentic self. And I started to feel more free. And I realized that manhood doesn't have to be a certain way. And, you know, feminism is about empowerment of women, but it also frees men from gender expectations. I'm calling all men to call out sexism and support feminism, to lift up women so that we can lift up humanity. So that was a long introduction and a little bit of my story, but I'm really excited to today's session. So thank you for having me.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction. And we're going to jump right into our Q&A session. And I also just want to encourage everyone who's participating, please go ahead and put your questions into the Q&A. And Nozomi and I have a bunch of questions for Shu-san, but we would definitely like to get to your questions as well. So to start things off, so you just were explaining to us, you know, what feminism is and what it means to you. But I'd like to understand from your perspective, why do you think that the concept of feminism carries such a negative connotation for some people? And I think that that's even sometimes for women, and there aren't too many men that refer to themselves as feminists.
Yeah, I think the media plays a huge role in portraying what feminism means to a lot of people, right? And I think the common misconceptions about feminism are believing that women are superior, men hating, you know, burning bras, believing feminism is negative and just for women or, you know, gay men. I think those are some common misconceptions. But, you know, I believe feminism is a belief that women and men are equal. And it means believing in gender equality and embracing differences. And what I like to say is feminism is inclusive. So if it's excluding anybody, I don't consider that feminism. So feminism is inclusive. And I think the reason why feminism carries such negative connotations for, you know, some people, actually a lot of people, is that I think many of them mistake feminism with misandry. Misandry is hating men, the opposite word for misogyny. And also wanting to smash the patriarchy doesn't mean it's matriarchal. So matriarchal is the opposite of patriarchy, like women are on the pedestal, right? And like I said, feminism is inclusive. So it's not about having women being on the pedestal. It's about smashing the pedestal altogether so we can be on the same level. So that, to me, that's what feminism is. And, you know, that's what I hope people understand what feminism is.
Great. I wonder, as we're answering that question, is there a better way to say it then, because feminism has such a negative connotation? Do you have a suggestion?
Maybe gender equality, because they're basically the same meaning. And, I think a lot more people can agree to promote gender equality than feminism, only because feminism has such a bad connotation, right?
Yeah.
But they're basically the same meaning.
Okay, great. And that wasn't the question I was going to ask, but I was just so curious. So bear with me. I always ask a lot of random questions. And another random question actually is, just talking about how difficult it is to change names in Japan and combining those two names. In reality, when you go out and talk to your friends, or say if you go for an interview, or just even, ordering coffee at Starbucks and say they ask your name, if you put Matsuo Post on there, how often is it that they would say your full name? Or maybe say like you're going to like a hospital and they're calling your name at the front desk. Like in reality, how is it?
Never happens. It's always
never happens.
It never happens. It's always Matsuo-san. Yeah.
And then how about your wife, your partner?
It's interesting. In Japan, it's usually Matsuo-san, because we have the first Matsuo first, right?
Yes.
So I think a lot of people see it and then like, oh, that's their last name. They don't even like see Post or wonder what Post is. Like, oh, what is that? Like, is that a middle name, or did they just put that on? I don't think many people consider that as part of our last name. When I make reservations at restaurants, I don't do this anymore, but because of COVID very often.
Yeah.
But when I did, I would often like kind of mix it up. Like sometimes like make a reservation as just Post, and then they're like, "What? Wait, is that your last name?" I'm like, "Yeah," So I kind of try to have fun with it. But if I actually write out Matsuo Post, 99, actually 100% of the time, they go by just Matsuo in Japan.
So do you go out of your way to correct that, or what? How do you deal with that?
I just repeat my last name, like, oh, it's Matsuo Post. But I don't know, most of them don't seem to get it. So I just kind of give up, unless it's like something actually really important.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, I have the same experience with the name Nozomi in the States. A lot of times it turns into Naomi, and I've given up a lot of times too. So I definitely understand. Yeah. Jessica, your turn.
Hi. So we actually had a couple of questions more generally about cultural differences too, because that was another part of your book I was really interested to hear about. I guess first, I think you spent 8.5 years in the US. And then you went back to Japan, and I think you experienced some reverse culture shock when you got back to Japan as well. So can you tell us a little bit about your experiences both in the US and then going back to Japan, as far as, differences in culture and what it's like living in both places?
Yeah, I think there are a few. One big difference in those two cultures is the individualistic culture and the collective culture. So, the U.S. is pretty famous for, having an individualistic culture, meaning like individuals are being an individual is so important. And in Japan, it's almost the opposite. Like being a collective, like, part of a group is so important. So conformity is so valued in Japan. And, I spent my first 15 years in this country, and then going to a culture that values individualism. So it took me a while to really express my own opinions with others. At schools, I remember like everyone's like raising their hands and like sharing their opinions. And you don't really see that in Japan. So I was like, okay, it's important to have my own opinions instead of like trying to be the same as others. So that was one of them. The other one is the way we communicate. So Japan is known for high contextual culture, which means there's a lot of context in communication. So we can communicate without using many words. because it's such a homogenous culture, and people are supposed to know like the backgrounds of our culture, right? In Japan, in the U.S., it's a low context culture, meaning you need to express very expressively, explain what you're trying to say to other people. Otherwise, they don't understand you. Like, you need to verbalize. So that was something that really shocked me. I was kind of frustrated, like, hey, why don't you just understand? Like, I'm trying to do this, but you know, it's just, I'm still dealing with it with my wife, because you know, she's very low contextual. I need to verbalize you know, things that I'm thinking. Otherwise, you know, she won't get me. So that's something that I'm still working on. So the reverse culture shock, because of I spent 8.5 years in the U.S. most of my adolescence. You know, when I came back to Japan as a 23-year-old young professional, you know, I look Japanese, I speak the language, and everyone expected me to be, you know, Japanese, behave in a Japanese way. But my Japanese language level was, you know, kind of stuck at, you know, when I was 15. So it wasn't as good as other, you know, Japanese people who stayed here. And my values, my core values had shifted a little bit to more American core values. But I'm not American, you know, I didn't speak English as good as the American native. So I was kind of lost. Like, I didn't know who I was. So that was those 2.5 years when I was back in Tokyo for the first time after being in the US for 8.5 years. I think I dealt with the biggest identity crisis of my life. And all I wanted to do was leave Japan again, because it felt good to be foreign, or it kind of felt good to be different than the majority. So being in Hong Kong really helped. Yeah.
Great. Well, then let's talk about your time in Hong Kong. So you mentioned that you found your identity during those 5 years you were in Hong Kong. And interestingly, actually, I've also lived in Hong Kong as well. And I felt lost. So I want to hear more about how you found your identity in Hong Kong.
Yeah, you felt lost in Hong Kong when you were in Hong Kong?
I say I felt lost, meaning you look alike, right? And they expect you to speak Cantonese, yet I didn't. So I felt lost in a sense of I didn't feel like I belonged. I guess that's a better way to say it. It's not so much my identity, but I didn't feel like belonged and misunderstood. And I felt, yeah, those were the feelings that I had. So I had a kind of mixed, not so happy time. And I was like 20 years old. So I think I was a little lost in general in my life. So I'd love to hear about your experience.
Yeah, so I was in my mid-20s when I moved to Hong Kong, and you know, when I left Japan, like I said, I was so lost. I didn't know who I was, and I was so desperate to find myself. And you know, Hong Kong, I didn't know too much about Hong Kong, to be honest. So maybe that really helped. But I was a minority by nationality, but you know, I'm Japanese, so everyone else is, you know, look very similar Asians. So that was the biggest difference between like being in the US and being in Hong Kong as a foreigner. And also Hong Kong is so diverse. I also met a lot of people with different backgrounds, and they had very similar stories like me. You know, some grew up in Africa and ended up in Hong Kong, Europe and Australia, you name it. Like I met all kinds of people, backgrounds, and you know, gender identity, sexual orientation, and you know, that was really cool to me, and I got to learn so much about the differences of people, and I love that. And you know, that's when I realized, like, oh, it's normal, like, you know, it's okay to be different. And you know, we can still embrace differences and come together as people. So that's how I felt for the 5 years in Hong Kong. So I really really enjoyed being in Hong Kong. And also I met my now wife in Hong Kong as well. So that really changed my life for the better as well.
Yeah, just building on that, can you please tell us the story of when you tried to take your wife out to dinner in Hong Kong and her reaction? I love this story.
Yeah, so I talk about this in my book, and my wife's birthday is September 11th. And ever since we met, I wanted to like ask her how her experience was on her birthday in 2001. And at the time we had been dating for like a few months already. And, I wanted to like take her out to a really nice restaurant. And I was really pumped about it. And I wanted to show my chivalry. I wanted to like be a gentleman, and the gentleman I thought I was supposed to be. So I took her out to a really nice restaurant, and I was like pulling the chair out for her so that, she was feeling like a lady. And I was recommending like the most expensive things on the menu, and ordering like the nice wine and all that stuff. And she was really appreciative of my gesture. But at the same time, she like kind of started to ask like, hey, like, can I ask why you do the things that you do? You say you're trying to be a gentleman. Like, what does that mean to you? So to give a little bit of background of my wife, she's an educator. She's a teacher. She teaches English at international schools. And at the time, she had just started teaching her annual gender and language unit. So she was, asking questions that she would ask her students, her high school students, about gender. And, gender was a topic that I never really thought about back then. So I was taken aback, and, I thought she was like attacking me a little bit by asking. But she was at the same time, she was very gentle with the way she asked. And, I don't remember exactly what we discussed the entire night, but I remember feeling like, oh my gosh, we just spent her birthday dinner talking about gender equality. And yeah, it was really interesting. And, that's when she asked me to watch Emma Watson's video of her famous he for she speech. She talks about if you believe in gender equality, you're a feminist. I'm sorry, you're a feminist. And I was like, oh yeah, I do believe in gender equality, but I never associated myself as a feminist. So that was really the beginning of my journey into feminism.
Yeah, I think that I like that story so much too, because it really made me feel also what a difficult time men must have sometimes with these things, because you're trying to do what you think is the right thing to do, and then the women, depending on the woman, can take it in a different way, and I think it gets very complicated. But that's wonderful that experience made you have this conversation and brought you to like a kind of a new understanding. So then going on to the next question I have for you. So you go back to Japan, and this time you go with your wife. And I'm assuming that there's also a lot of ways that you don't really fit in with more traditional Japanese culture, especially as it relates to work. I know you talk about like the cultural expectation to work really long hours. And I think I'd be very interested to find out how you resist that pressure to conform, especially as a Japanese man. I think that when women work in Japan, even foreign women who work in Japan, they do feel that pressure also. But I think the women are kind of given a pass somewhat, because the Japanese, especially managers, assume, well, the woman has, family obligations or whatever. But I don't think they quite have that understanding with men. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think knowing the why behind those expectations is important, and also communicating what's important to you with the people you work with, especially with your boss and peers and your team members as well. So what I mean by that is kind of going back to the high contextual culture that Japan has, it's easy to kind of go with the flow without actually talking about the issue or what you're going through. So oftentimes, you go out, you work long hours because everyone else is like still there, looking like they're working, right? Or your boss is still there, so it feels awkward for you to leave. But if it's important for you to spend time with your family too, you need to communicate that very clearly with your boss. So, that's something that I practice. It's not easy, but like, hey, this is important to me. And for me, work is important too. And if it's about performance, I can work on being productive and getting things done on in the work hours, so that I can go home and spend time with your family. And the more you clear about that, the more that people will understand what's important in your life. So that's something that I started to practice. And the more you do it, it gets easier. People will understand what you value and who you are, and they will respect you for that. And if you don't express it, people will think like, okay, well, this person's going to come to nomikai after work hours, and they probably enjoy it. They think it's important. And if it's not, like, you need to kind of talk about that, to your boss or to the peers directly, so that they can understand you and they respect you for it.
Yeah, that is so important. Like setting the boundaries, right? Being really clear what they are and communicating that. And that is so difficult for all of us. So it's so great to hear how you navigated through that and how you are doing it right now. So my next question is about the Japanese language. And this is something probably subconsciously the Japanese speakers just don't notice. So you talk about how sexism is ingrained in the Japanese language. Can you tell us more and tell us a little bit about what you think should be done?
Yes, I think in Japanese, yes, absolutely. And many other languages as well, even in English. I don't know too much about other languages, but the Japanese, it's like, especially like in kanji, you can see like what they mean. So what I mean by that, my favorite one is how you refer your partners, your husbands and your wife. There are so many ways to refer to your husbands and wives, right? So the most sexist one, I think, but it's so commonly used, is shujin. So for those who speak Japanese, you know what shujin looks like in kanji. But for those who are not familiar with the Japanese kanji, shujin, it literally means main person or master. And, to me, a master of the household, a wife can be a master of the household. But when you say shujin, it refers to a husband. So, yeah, when I first kind of realized that, like, why are people using this? Like, it's like, it has to be the man to be a master of the household. So, I heard my mom saying that one time, and I asked her, like, hey, why do you use this word? And she wasn't even aware of it. And she started to have conversation with my dad, and that's when she stopped saying like shujin, because she didn't believe in that. They believe in like equal partnerships, which I respect. And a lot of people, when I mention as well, that's when they kind of realize like, oh, okay, well, no, I'm gonna stop saying shujin then. And then also yome is a way to say your wife, right? But yome is used for a wife who joined the husband's family registry. And it almost sounds like she is his property, like when you say yome. So, like those subtle things, like I used to never think about, but I think it's important to kind of think about what the kanji characters actually mean and what kind of meanings they carry, and then change the way you refer to your partner or, yeah. And then there are many things that you can do, but I think the most gender neutral way is to say just your partner or tsureai. So I try to refer to my wife as my partner, patona, in Japanese as well, as much as I can. And some people are like, what does that mean? Like, are you married to a woman or are you even married to this person? But, that's up to you to decide how much information that you want to disclose. And it's kind of awkward in the beginning, but I've been doing this for some time, so I feel a lot more comfortable saying that to anybody. But yeah, I think you see a lot of sexism in a language. So those are just a few examples, but there are other examples as well.
All right. We actually have a lot of questions from the audience, so we're just going to move to that in just a second. But right before, there's just one question I really need to ask you, and it's about paternity leave. It's interesting that, even Japan, that being a pretty, gender unequal country, but still has pretty good options for taking paternity leave. You may be aware in the US, that even maternity leave is something that's not guaranteed. Just to share a tiny bit about my experience. I mean, my husband, I think, had 1 day off after our children were born. I only had 3 weeks of maternity leave, and the rest I needed to take. I took 3 weeks vacation to only have 6 weeks maternity leave. And I remember him going back to work after I had the baby. I had the baby home 1 day. And I remember he left me alone, and I'm just sitting on my bedroom floor, just crying, like, I do not know what to do with this baby. I'm all alone. And so I'm a huge advocate of men being able to take paternity leave and to support their wives and develop that bond with their children. And but I'd really like to know what that experience was like in Japan. Like, how do you ask for it? Is it accepted? And is there a risk for you in terms of your workplace, thinking that you're not as committed?
Yes, so I am, thank you for mentioning that. And I'm a huge advocate for men taking paternity leave all over the world, especially in Japan, because Japanese parental leave system is the best in the world. It's the most generous parental leave system in the world. So what I mean by that is that both mothers and fathers can take up to 12 months. Depending on the situation, it's actually up to 18 months. But for most couples, it's 12 months of paid parental leave. And you get paid to take time off, and you get paid by the government. So, your employer is not paying for you, which works for them as well. So the government wants you to take time off. And the sad truth is, while 83% of mothers take maternity leave, only 7% of fathers took it in 2020. And the most interesting fact is that over 80% of men entering the workforce say they want to take paternity leave. So there's a huge gap between the men who want to take it and men who actually take it. And I think the biggest reason is the social pressure, or the risks that they go through. And those risks are the same risks that these mothers go through as well. But for men, I guess societally, most cultures still think that childcare is for mothers, like mother's job. And I think that's the biggest issue. Just because biologically mothers go through that, birth experience, which is, I saw it when my wife went through it. It's like so miraculous. It's the most wonderful thing I've ever seen. And physically and emotionally, it's like so exhausting as well. And for men, like, we don't go through that. But I think it's so important for the father to be there and as a partner as well. And, this is my 7th month of my paternity leave, and I am so grateful to be able to do this. And I'm so glad that I got to spend time with our son and support my wife, and also spend time with my family and her family as well. I wouldn't have been able to do this if I kept working, or if I went back to work shortly after the birth of our son. So there are so many benefits to it too, like bonding with your child early on, establishing, like household responsibilities early on as a couple with a child. And also, I'm excited to go back to work, because I'm so like, I'm filled with the sense of gratitude and appreciation to my team, so that I want to give back. And I feel like mentally I'm so refreshed. So hopefully I can be more productive when I get back to work. Yeah, I think that the biggest risk is fearing what will happen when people go back to work. I'm actually going through it. It would be a lie if I said like I have no fears. Like I do have, a little bit of fear, because things have changed so much since I last left the workplace. So I don't know what it's going to be like, but it's something that many mothers who've taken maternity leave have experienced and that they go through. And it's only fair that men experience this as well. So, so if the more we normalize this for fathers as well, I think it's going to make it easier for mothers and fathers to go back to work after taking parental leave. So I think it's really, really important to value childcare by promoting mothers and fathers to take parental leave in Japan and all over the world.
Thank you. That's such great comment. I absolutely agree with you, right? The normalization of it would level the playing field, I think, for everyone. So that's wonderful. All right, well, let's get to our audience questions. We've got a bunch here. I'm going to combine the first two questions. They were first asking about, back to at the beginning where you're talking about feminism. So based on your introduction, is your definition of feminism related to the rejection of gender as a binary construct? And also kind of related to that, smash the patriarchy sounds so violent. And does it need to be that way also? So yeah, feminism and smashing the patriarchy.
The first question, rejection of binary. Yeah, I don't think gender is binary. Obviously, there are non-gender binary people. So, and then the patriarchy, to me, is what's creating those gender rigid norms, creating those like binary gender, like, gender is a two, and then they're supposed to be as different as possible they should be. And I don't believe in that. I think gender expression, which is, masculinity and femininity, those are human qualities. So as a man, it's natural to have feminine qualities as well. As a woman, I think it's natural to have masculine qualities as well. And just biologically, maybe more women tend to have more feminine qualities biologically, and maybe more men tend to have more masculine qualities. But, I think everyone has a certain levels of in between qualities. And I think the patriarchy kind of divides like just men and women, masculinity and femininity. And, that's what's causing this gender inequality. So smashing the patriarchy, I know it sounds violent, but the patriarchy is what's dividing us. And feminism is inclusive. Feminism isn't the opposite of patriarchy. The opposite of patriarchy is matriarchy. And that's not feminism. Feminism is inclusive. So, as a man who wants to have more feminine gender expression, that's okay. But in the patriarchal world, that's not okay, because if you're a man, you're supposed to be in this man box, like, supposed to demonstrate more masculine qualities. So I'm not rejecting masculine qualities at all. It's about feeling okay to express yourself regardless of your gender. Because, masculine qualities and feminine qualities are both human qualities. Hope that answered the questions.
Yeah, we actually kind of have a related question too, because you talk about male and female qualities. The next question actually talks about male and female roles in society. So I think those are two different things, right? Mm-hmm. So this person says, you mentioned that the patriarchal system limits male and female roles in society, and that causes it to become more of a prison than for it to be freedom. So in your opinion, do you think that the patriarchal system needs to be reformed or altogether abolished and something new is put in its place?
I mean, it's existed for such a long time, so I don't know what it looks like to like completely abolish. I think it's going to be a long process to get to more equal, inclusive society. And I don't know how long it's going to take, but I think it's important for all of us to acknowledge that we live in a patriarchal society. Most countries, if not all. So I think it's going to be a process. I don't know if we're going to completely achieve like fully gender equal society, especially in our lifetime. I think it's going to take longer than that, but hopefully we'll get there by doing a lot of work for the future generation.
Great. Next question is about authenticity. How do you find people and spaces where you can be fully authentic? I feel that sometimes my authentic self isn't accepted. Is authenticity a certain feeling for you? Can you please describe your experience with authenticity?
Yes, my experience with authenticity. I think finding and then like being vulnerable is it's important to be vulnerable, but not with everyone in your life at once. I think there are different steps and stages, because to see your authenticity, like people need to earn that. Like it's not like it's not given. So what I started to do was, obviously there are small group of people that I trust more than the other people in my life. So I started with those people first. Like, hey, this is what I believe. Like, this is like, especially like publishing my book. I was very scared to go public with that idea. And I started with my family members, with my wife, obviously, close friends, to see what they thought it was, and started to have those conversations. And I got overwhelming support from those people. So I knew it's something that I can actually, share with the world as well. So not everyone's gonna like your, I guess, what you decide to be or your authenticity in the beginning. But I think it's important to not let that discourage you to be who you actually truly want to be. And it's okay to take baby steps, starting with like people you actually trust, and then, kind of spreading, maybe eventually, putting it out on your social media that's public, so that, people can see. But I took small steps to like show my true authenticity.
Okay, thank you. Next question is actually about Bushido. And does that, how do you demonstrate that in your life? Does it exist? Is it completely outdated? The old samurai code of the way that you're supposed to act, right? So chivalry, how do you feel about that?
Bushido, oh, chivalry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Bushido specifically, but yeah, chivalry as well.
Yeah, so I'm not rejecting the idea of chivalry. I think chivalry is a beautiful thing. It can be dangerous, or it can be sexist if you're only being nice to a certain group of people. So in this case, it's usually men being nice to women, right? So I think that can be, that could be sexist. If you're like just completely like separating, like, okay, I'm only going to be nice to women because I'm chivalrous, I'm a gentleman, and I don't really care about other groups. I don't believe in. I believe in kindness. If chivalry means kindness, I think that's great. Like, you be kind to people who are in need, or just other people, regardless of their gender, or regardless of their, gender identity, or whatever that might be. I think that's something I believe, instead of just a particular group of people.
Right, okay. Next question is about the royal family and the lineage. So there's been a lot of discussion in the Japanese news about whether if there's no male heir, to the throne, whether how that should pass down. And so do you have any thoughts on that, whether it should pass through the mother's line? Do you skip the generation? How do you deal with the problem that they're being?
I think that's the epitome of patriarchy, right? Like keeping the power with men. So I obviously feel like, it should be equal. We should have like female emperor, like queen, or, whatever they call it. So that's my personal opinion. And I know there's a long history of that system. But to me, that's the epitome of patriarchy.
All right, great. Next question is actually from my husband. He says that, hi, Shusan, it's Tim, I'm Jessica's husband. He says, I think the hardest thing for me when it came to embracing feminism was letting go of this idea that the man is supposed to provide for the family. Jessica was much more interested in having a challenging career than I was, so it wasn't a difficult decision for me to stay home. I think it helped a lot that both Jessica and I were willing to try what works for us instead of sticking to the roles expected each of us to play. But what do you think about that concept of men having to be the provider? And is that something that you think it's more difficult for men, I think, to make that decision, isn't it, to stay home?
Yeah, totally. And it's something I'm going through right now as well, like being off of my full-time work. I just published my book, and then I've been doing some speaking engagements for the past few months. So that's keeping me busy. But I often find myself like needing to like provide value, or just being a kind of like a provider, not necessarily like the financially, but like provide value to the people I love or people that I care about. And it's hard for me to kind of not do anything. I don't want to say not do anything, because childcare is providing value as well. But seeing that as like such valuable things as well. Because for me, like my internal value was so tied to my career, being able to provide financially until a few years ago. It's definitely taking me some time to kind of like deconstruct that value system within me. So I totally understand what your husband mentioned as well. Yeah, it's not easy. Like saying is like I preach it, but it's something that I'm still going through for sure.
Right. And we're almost out of time. So I think what I'll do, I've got one more question here, and then I think we'll have Yoshi on for the closing remarks. And then Shusan, would you mind staying a bit longer if anyone wants to hang on the line a bit, because we actually still have like 5 or 6 more questions for those who might want to continue the conversation. But the last question, and I think this is actually a great one to kind of end on, is what do you recommend for broaching the subject of feminism with men? So you talked about being introduced to gender for you, those first conversations with your wife, and how did, you change your way of thinking? So how can the rest of us bring these topics up with the men in our lives?
Yeah, so what I'm committed to doing, or what I practice, is just like, everyday lives, those some comments that your male friends make or male colleagues make, just I think confronting those maybe sexist comments or gender bias comments, but not by attacking it, by like being curious about it. Hey, you said this, like, what does that mean? For example, I wrote this in my book as well. I had an opportunity to be one of the judges at a pitch contest, and I was paired up with 2 executives from 2 international companies, and I didn't know those people. And in the waiting room, we were talking about our careers, and those 2 gentlemen were talking about their careers, and they made some kind of like a gender bias comment towards women. So I said, hey, what do you mean by that? I was genuinely curious, and I don't think they thought that was like an attack, but they had an opportunity to explain what they meant by their comment. So I think starting with that, it brings attention to the topic of gender, because it's such a taboo topic. It's been such a taboo topic that no one wants to talk about deeply. But I think it's important to start discussing and about gender by asking questions and being curious about those, gender bias comments. And for like flat out sexism, it's obviously important to call out like, hey, that's not okay. And it's important for men to call out, sexism, especially made by other men, so that you're standing up for, women in your life or other people. So I think that's something you can do every day, because we all have sexist thoughts or gender biases. Even people who believe in feminism, like I still do, and I still challenge myself, and I ask people around me to hold myself accountable as well. So I think those are the small steps that you can make, and the most important thing is to talk about it, to actually talk about gender and gender inequality in our lives.
Yoshi, can I turn it over to you for our closing remarks, and then we can answer a couple more questions to those who want to stay on the line after?
Sure. Thank you so much, Shu-san, and thank you so much, Jessica-san, and thank you so much, Nozomi-san, for today's discussions. I think we can certainly talk for hours and hours, and this is a topic that will be certainly ongoing. So we appreciate everyone taking the time to listen in and share your thoughts. Certainly the gender expectations and breaking down the cultural norms and limitations is a more important topic than ever right now, with all that is happening around the world. A lot of sad things, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of opportunity for both men and women and people from all over the world to kind of work together and kind of break down these barriers, right? So we certainly encourage everyone tuning in to take this story back home, talk to your loved ones, to your friends, colleagues, and hopefully we can keep this movement going. So a lot of great things happening with the Japan American Society, but we look forward to seeing you next time. Everyone be safe. But at this time, let's maybe do a 5-minute overtime and keep the conversation going with Shu-san, Jessica-san, and Nozomi-san. Over to Jessica-san or Nozomi-san, please.
All right, great. Yeah, there's so many great questions. I would hate to end it. I think this was probably the most questions I've ever seen in a webinar that we've done. So I'm really happy about the audience engagement. And also we are recording this, so maybe people will be able to catch the last few questions if they have to drop off. The next question is asking, do you have any book or blog recommendations for feminist language in Japanese? So as language changes, how we use it updates for Japanese language learners.
Yeah, I was actually typing an answer to that question, and I think someone else mentioned the book. I really like the book called Women's Word or Women's Sword. I think it was published back in, what is it, like, does it say 1987? So it needs a little bit of an update, but it's like, it talks about like specific Japanese words that are, I guess, sexist or have some sexist connotation. So I learned a lot from that book. If you are talking specifically about feminist language in Japanese. But yeah, I need to find something that's more updated.
Great. Well, good. Yeah. And actually, a lot of the things that you mentioned too beforehand, I started learning Japanese 25 years ago, and I just take it for granted that you call your wife kanai, the woman in the house. I just never even thought about it. And honestly, I used to think like Yome-san was kind of cute because it sounds like, oh, it's my bride. But when you started really explaining what everything means, it's causing me to rethink things as well. So thanks for that. Let's see, the next question that we had, let's see. Does the Japanese word partner have the same connotation of being for same-sex couples as it does in the US? Partner. So if you're using partner in Japanese, does it sound like here in the US, that sounds like it's a same-sex relationship?
I think maybe to a certain extent. I used to think that way when I started calling my partner a few years ago. But I've noticed that more and more people in Japan started to use that word actually, which is pretty encouraging. And they don't have the same sex partners, so I think it's that's changing. I don't know. Is it still that way in the U.S.? Like when you say, "Hey, this is my partner," does it carry a meaning that your partner it's a same sex partner?
I mean, certainly I can't answer for everyone. That's my perception as well. And I think that's what the person who's asking the question has. So I think, yes, to probably still general population, that's still the case. Right? It may just question people. And I think what you said also, the idea perhaps these people are not married. You know, if they can clearly see that you're you know, male and female, then they may assume it's not a marriage in English. Yeah. Yeah, interesting. So we're all sort of in this problem of like how to address one another, right? So it really makes you think. The next question actually was about unfortunately what happened in Atlanta the other day with the murders of the 6 Asian American women. What was the response in the Japanese media to that? I actually did see quite a few articles, but you obviously heard about it in Japan.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. I think, I mean, I've gotten most of the information from like the local TV or like a publications. And I just saw like a news segment about this, and it was very brief, but it definitely talks about it was a hate crime against Asian Americans, and it did talk about like kind of specific, like every time something happens outside of Japan, I think the first thing that the Japanese media reports is like, was there any Japanese American or Japanese person involved? So they did talk about that. But I'm curious to see more news coverage about this. But we're starting to see more and more coverage about hate crimes against Asians in the US and actually all over the world. Yeah, here as well.
What is your goal for Japan in terms of gender equality? I see that you're working to open up a dialogue, but are you also working to help create this new cultural norm in Japan? And if so, how?
Yes, so the long-term, like the big goal is obviously to close the global gender gap index. So there is an index for most countries, and Japan is ranked 121st out of 153 ranking system, which is the lowest amongst the developed countries. So we can't get worse than this. We can only go up from here. So closing the gap, I don't personally have like a what ranking I want to be, but definitely closing the gap as quickly as possible. And I think one of the most effective way to do it is to increase the percentage of paternity leave taken by fathers. So I truly believe in that. The reason being is that, childcare. So if more men go through this process, I think more men will start to understand that childcare is very hard and challenging and so important. And the culture is going to start to value childcare because, like many cultures, Japan doesn't, sadly. Individual levels, many do, like many men do, but in the cultural level, I don't think it does still. So I'm working with my employer and actually other organizations to really educate men about the system, the parental leave system. Many people actually don't know about this generous system that Japan has. And I'm sharing my story, like how beneficial it can be for fathers and men, and also for the organizations. So the goal that I have, Japan has a goal to get that percentage of paternity leave taken by men to 30% by year 2030. I definitely want to contribute to achieve that, if not higher. So increasing from 7% in 2020 to 2030 in 2025, that's a very audacious, big goal. But I want to do whatever I can to get there.
Yeah, I'm interested to know if that will be sped up a little bit, considering what's happening now with coronavirus, and so many of us are working from home. That I have heard, in the media talking about it for the first time. Many men realize all that goes into running the household at home. It was all this invisible work being done primarily by the women that's all of a sudden very visible with the men being home. So I wonder if that will help to also move the needle on things like paternity leave as well, just culturally. I think we're starting to see a bit of a shift, or I hope that that's what's going to happen. And actually, the last question we have is related to paternity leave. So again, we can kind of end on that note. But the question is, if you take paternity leave, are you guaranteed your job after 18 months? So this is in Japan. You're guaranteed.
Yes, it's guaranteed.
Yeah.
But there have been many incidents where, especially men coming back from paternity leave, being harassed. It's called paternity leave harassment. That, like, hey, you took this much time off. Like, what are you doing as a man? Like, you're not going to get promoted. We're not going to promote you, or, we're going to send you to somewhere else that no one wants to go, or whatever. So that's happened in the past, but that's obviously illegal. So it's guaranteed. And, it's something that I think many parents go through, especially if they take extended parental leave, right? And coming back. Because I do feel a little bit rusty. Like, I haven't really worked in 7 months. So I'm a little bit nervous to go back to see how people will see me as a team player, as a worker. But I think it's really up to me, how to show commitment, obviously, and get back into whatever I need to do. And if I fail to do what I need to do, I need to do something about it. And then that's something I'm committed to. I'm committed to performing at work, and also I'm committed to continue being a present father and husband at home. So I think creating that a balanced work-life balance is it's something that I'm going to have to really deal with. But I'm also really excited about it because I've been thinking about this for some time. But yeah, going back to the original question, it is guaranteed after taking paternity leave.
All right. Well, I think that's such a great message to end on. We'd love to have you back sometime and hear how that worked out, after you get back into the workplace, and what was that transition like? I would love to hear that. But thank you so much for being so generous with your time. And it was a great conversation and good questions from everyone who joined us in the audience. Yoshi, you have any final remarks?
Just one final remark is that Shu-san, you will have to make this a guarantee to visit us in person in Atlanta. And hopefully we can continue this very important discussion. And we look forward to continue collaborating and working together. And I know you're a big golfer too, so hopefully spring season you will enjoy some outdoor time and play some golf. And there's a lot of great golf courses here in Georgia too. So hopefully we'll see you in person very soon.
Oh, that would be wonderful. I would love to visit Atlanta. Thank you so much for inviting me for this such a wonderful opportunity. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining us. Be safe, be healthy, and remember to check out I Took Her Name by Shu Matsuo Post on the Amazon, and then certainly reach out to the Japan American Society of Georgia too if you need any help with anything. But Shu-san does have a very special campaign going on where he has some discounts throughout this week and next week too. So definitely check out his book. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.